My name is Maura O'Cronin. I'm the director of Galway Early Music. And Galway Early Music, in collaboration with Limerick Early Music, is hosting this Zoom with Teddie Hwang and Yonit Kosovske. So the first thing for me to do is to welcome you all. And it's lovely to see you all here. So just to introduce the Zoom is inspired by the beautiful and atmospheric concert Discovering Light that Teddie Hwang and Yonit Kosovske performed during the Galway Early Music Festival in May this year. It was Yonit who suggested to me that Jem contact Teddie Hwang about the project, and because the theme for our festival was, and theme for our year is Musica et Scientia. So the relationship between music and science, which was very strong from the medieval era right through to the baroque era. So a musical look at that. And we had a fantastic festival, and the project Teddie's just fit the theme so beautifully. So not only were we thrilled to have Teddie and Yonit perform Discovering Light, which featured beautiful baroque music and stunning photographs of the night sky by Teddie, shown on a 16-foot screen. But Teddie also agreed to be our poster person for the festival, which we thank her for, and it was excellent. One last introductory comment. The recording of Discovering Light is available on our website, galwayearlymusic.com, under the events menu for the festival. It's still there, and I'll put the link into the chat. And it's a ticketed event. It's €15, which goes to support Galway Early Music in its attempts to bring early music to the west of Ireland. So we can highly recommend the beautiful concert, which will be especially meaningful after hearing Teddie and Yonit talk about how it came about. So I'll put that link into the chat. So to introduce the speakers, Teddie, I'm going to read some of what she said herself. Teddie Hwang is fascinated by the timbre and vocal qualities of the baroque traverso. She's based in Germany, and she collaborates with a variety of ensembles, playing repertoire ranging from the 17th century air de cour to 19th century symphonies. And she's given workshops on historical performance in many important places. And she studied traverso with Wilbert Hazelzet, and received her master's degree in historical flute performance from the, and I'm not sure the pronunciation, Koninklijk Conservatorium, Netherlands. She holds a bachelor's degree in music and Germanic studies from Indiana University, USA, where she studied modern flute with Catherine Lucas and graduated with high distinction. She's a winner of the Baroque Flute Artist Competition held by the National Flute Association of America and has also adjudicated for its competitions. So in addition to the flute, she is a photographer. She specializes in portraiture for musicians. And in the context of this talk, she's also a member of the International Dark Sky Association. She combines her musical performance with her works in landscape astrophotography to bring awareness of our natural night sky, a common heritage which connects us all. So Yonit maintains an active and international career as a soloist and collaborative artist on harpsichord, chamber organ, modern piano, and forte piano. Her repertoire spans from the Renaissance through contemporary music. She's been noted for her creative and elegant programming and has been applauded for her sensitive and fiery performances, and I can personally vouch for both of those things. Originally from the United States, Yonit moved to Ireland in 2011 when she was appointed lecturer of music at the Irish World Academy of Music and Dance, University of Limerick. Yonit holds a Doctor of Music from Indiana University, Jacobs School of Music, with a minor in music history and music literature. Other degrees include a Master of Music from the San Francisco Conservatory of Music and a Bachelor of Music in Piano Performance from Rutgers University, Mason Gross School of Arts. She also studied at the Rubin Academy of Music and Dance in Jerusalem and at the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston. Her book, Historical Harpsichord Technique, Developing la douceur du toucher, was published by Indiana University in Press in 2011. So there you are. We have a very star-studded cast here. So at this point, I'm going to hand the Zoom over to Teddie Hwang, who will take it away from here. Thank you, Teddie.
Thank you so much, Mara. That was a really warm welcome and welcoming introduction. Hello, everyone. Saying hi from Mainz, Germany here. Thank you so much also again, Mara and Yonit and Vlad for hosting us tonight. We're really excited to be talking to you about the making of this project. And I just thought it might be interesting and fun to take you behind the scenes and share some of the work and details that were involved in creating the program. So we'll start with that first, and then I'll invite Yoni to the floor to share what the process was like for her as a collaborator, and talk a little bit about the rehearsal period preceding the concert. So Discovering Light is a program featuring Baroque chamber music for flute and harpsichord and my landscape astrophotography. Just as Mara introduced, I'm also a photographer. I work in portraiture for musicians, and this night or astrophotography is actually something I discovered fairly recently for myself back in 2020. And when I initially submitted my concert proposal for the festival, I actually didn't include image projection as part of the program. Yonit and I talked about this, and our concern was that people may end up concentrating more on the images, and then the music kind of disappears it disappears in the background, and that it becomes then a secondary thing in the overall experience. But nevertheless, we thought that to include my astrophotography would be a wonderful addition to the program, and especially, as Maura said, the theme of the festival was about science. So my idea was that the images serve to suggest a kind of space for the music. With the photography, you can think of it like the stage set of a theater. And while the image will have certain elements or qualities which reflect the music, it's not so much about that, okay, this photo is about this music or vice versa. And actually, that would actually be really hard to do, as the essential aesthetic in Baroque music is all about the changing of affects, different gestures, varying emotions. Baroque music is theatrical. And so if we were to somehow follow that with the imagery, then one would have to change images basically every couple of seconds, and that would eventually turn it into a slideshow, and that's not what we wanted. We didn't want to offer a slideshow. We wanted to still give the audience a concert experience and not have them become fixated on the photography. So I opted for this setting the scene, the kind of theatrical scene approach, and the music is the drama that happens in this created space. This explains why one image remains up for a longer period of time, and that changes in imagery only happen when it's necessary and not simply to show another pretty photo. And in fact, I'll explain later on that not all images are meant to be just pretty. So here's the opening of our program. This is the first image that people see. It starts out very relaxed. We begin with a sonata in G major by the French composer Beaumartier, and it's got that sweet introductory movement. The image here also suggests a very gentle, rolling landscape. It's relatively light. So it's just like giving everyone a warm welcome and inviting people to a leisurely stroll into this friendly scenery. This image doesn't actually change until the third movement, where the music really bursts and radiates with energy. So if we can have the next photo, please. There we go. And as you can see, this kind of radiating energy is evoked in the photo by the very last rays of sunlight reflected by the fine clouds. Another important element in this program is the very slow transitions between images. So that's the moment when one photo changes to the next one. I use 12 seconds each time, and transitions are fascinating when you see how the elements in the old image disappear as the new ones enter. And for me, this reflects the concept of the idea that the goal is not always the most important, but what happens on the way towards the goal. If we were to translate that to music, the most exciting thing for us musicians is looking at what happens between the notes. So how notes link to form phrases and how phrases work together to create the whole composition. So we're not focusing just on the single notes themselves, but how kind of everything work together and how notes relate to each other. Regarding the programming of pieces, the idea was actually born out of the pure fact that both Yonit and I wanted to play the J.S. Bach sonata in B minor with each other. And actually, we've been talking about that for a couple of years. So once again, thank you to Mara for making that happen. The piece is demanding on all levels for both instruments. So the B minor sonata is definitely not just a flute sonata and has a unique place in Bach's oeuvre. So we basically started with this piece and then built the program around it with the connection to the night sky already in mind. And besides the Bach in B minor, I thought it was also interesting to include the sonata in B minor by Georg Philipp Telemann. In the Baroque era, the key of B minor was associated with melancholy. The German theorist Matthäusson described the key as bizarre, which actually fits the Bach quite well, and also lonely, according to the French composer Marc-Antoine Charpentier. From their compositions, it's clear that both Bach and Telemann felt the melancholiness and really darkness of this tonality, while also adding their own nuances. So at first, I thought about using this image for the first movement of the Telemann. I wanted an image which reflects that solo bass line in the opening, so literally that kind of lonely affect. But then I felt this space wouldn't actually quite work for the second movement, as it's just a bit too dark and the space kind of too enclosed. The second movement has somewhat of a rustic dance character to it, so it needs to have a bit more light and literally space for it to dance. So I ended up with this image, which is something lighter. There's more space in the sky, and the cooler blue tone suggests just the right amount of seriousness without being too dark. The third movement is in D major. And so going from B minor to D major is an obvious analogy to the night sky experience. And I share that experience in my narration preceding the piece, where once your eyes are adjusted to the darkness, light literally opens up in front of you. So I think we don't have to, or I don't have to explain much about this image. Let's just see how that worked in concert. I'll now play for you a video segment. This is the end of the second movement of the end of the second movement of the Telemann, going into the third movement. And notice how the images and the slow transition work together with the music to evoke how darkness can open up and become light. Is there sound?
No, we're not hearing the sound. I think you need to share the sound on Zoom.
Rameau's Dialogue of the Muses, which is a harpsichord solo, the pacing of the images accelerates. Except for one instance, the image changes in every movement, and this pacing remains until the end of the concert. I used this visual technique to reflect the dramatic development of the program.
For Johann Caspar Fischer's Toccata, I was for a long time convinced to use this photo. So I thought about, my first idea was using this for the Toccata, and I liked how the edit turned out. The Milky Way looks almost foreboding, and the dark silhouette of the tree and the overall kind of almost monochrome palette echo the solemnity of the music. But the more I went through the music internally, I realized that the scene or space must be something bigger, something that's beyond our earthly world. Fischer's clever use of chromaticism keeps leading the listener forward as the music never truly cadences. So in this music, it's like we're being pulled by some incredible force which takes us into completely unknown territory. Yeah, Fischer and his clever use of chromaticism really, just pulls us into unknown territory. So I didn't feel like this really fits that music anymore. And I looked further in my archives and decided on this one. And I usually do a couple of these kinds of compositions in each session where I just photograph into the sky. And the idea is not so much about capturing actual astronomical objects, but it's about a certain feeling or state of being in that moment. And this happens to be a portion of the North America Nebula. And after the editing, the color actually turned out to remind me of a pulsating heart, which I guess also kind of fits to the Toccata. So now let's look at how Rameau's Dialogue of the Muses transitions into Fischer's Toccata. And you're going to see how the subdued colors in the Rameau dissolve into space as we're led by Fischer's really wondrous harmonic tension. Thank you very much for that. So as you can see and hear, it's actually very hard to select a segment of it because the music just really wants you to keep listening on. In our program, the Toccata is then followed by the Passacaglia from the same suite, and then we arrive at J.S. Bach's Sonata in B minor. The second movement of the Bach was also one of those where I went through a long searching process. And first I thought about this following image. But then I reflected on Bach's indication, which is largo e dolce. Largo means large and dolce means sweet. And perhaps the colors here may suggest a sort of dolce sweetness, but for me it's not quite large enough. And I think in this case it's because of the field of view. So this photo was shot with a 19mm lens, whereas the image that was finally chosen was shot with a 14mm lens. And although 19mm is basically considered as wide angle, 14mm is obviously just a little bit wider, and it's amazing how just a couple of millimeters make that big difference. And also it has to do with the composition. And I mentioned in the concert that for me, this movement is about enlightenment. And so I find it appropriate to actually show a brilliant view of the Milky Way and have the focus really on that transitional space between our Earth and the universe. And I think the mountains also help emphasize that feeling of height and vastness. The third movement of the Bach is actually not a pretty movement. And in fact, I see the last Jig as a kind of a dance of the dead. So in German, we'd say Totentanz or Danse macabre in French, which are also musical genres. And coming from that timeless second movement into this one really requires a drastic change, as they couldn't be more different from each other. And to be honest, I thought to myself that the image should actually be something that you wouldn't want to look at for a long time, which is kind of hard for us photographers, right? Because we want people to enjoy our images. So this was obviously another challenge. But thankfully, I was reminded of the strange moon set I experienced in the Dolomites, where these ominous looking clouds and the moon created a fantastic backlighting effect. Compared to this other image, which was shot in the same session, I feel the chosen one had a much more feeling of that macabre and bizarre expression. So again, quoting from Mattheson regarding the key of B minor. Bach ends the sonata with a very severe expression. And the question for us was also where to actually place the Bach at all in the program. Should we end with the Bach or should something else follow? And I mean, what piece can follow after this Bach sonata? Many performers might choose to end the program with a Bach just because it's such a monumental piece and it's challenging to find something suitable to play afterwards. I, however, didn't want to leave the audience with that intense, ominous emotion as the last impression. So we finally then decided on Danglebert's Tombeau de Monsieur de Chambonnier. The piece is in D major, which is the relative major of B minor, and thus gives a perfect transition in terms of tonality as well as affect. The title means the tomb of Mr. Chambonnier, so the music was written as a kind of a musical offering or a prayer in memoriam of Mr. Chambonnier. It delivers the message of solace and relief, which is what I wanted the audience to take home with them. And for Danglebert, I decided on this photo, which was taken in the first days of the war in Ukraine. And that photo session actually also gave me the same feelings of comfort and hope, just like Danglebert's music does. One can think of the motif here as the path leading to heaven, and to embed the symbolism and conclude the program in such a way felt the most meaningful for me. And actually with that, I'll end my portion of the talk here, and then I'd like to invite Yonit to the mic and have her share some thoughts about our collaboration process. And I actually, so I'll start out with some questions. We actually, the images, I chose myself and put everything together just because for pure organizational reasons. And there, as you can see, there are a lot of components into putting all this together. So Yoni didn't actually see the images until we rehearsed when I arrived in Ireland. So I'm actually really curious to ask Yoni, did seeing the images actually influence your interpretation of the music in any way? And if you may just kind of tell us about that.
Yeah, that's such a great question. Can you all hear me? Yeah. You know, I'm fascinated by interdisciplinary collaboration. And the question that I always have when you put more than one genre together is what changes, what is transformed? Does something change for the performers? does something influence the listeners, the audience, the viewers? And does it matter? Why are we putting these things together? And as performers and as directors and as curators who design programs, there's a tremendous responsibility in this exciting artistic way of guiding the audience on a journey. And we can't know exactly what they're going to listen to or feel or look at, but we're kind of like a museum guide or a tour guide, and we can help influence what they might consider looking at first or paying attention to. And then their interpretation and what they take away from it, of course, is entirely unique and individual to everyone. So to get back to your question, Teddie, I don't know if I have a black or white answer to say yes or no, it influenced my interpretation. I don't think it changed my interpretation per se, but it's a new way of considering the music and thinking about what this music might mean to you. And it's more information. And so that contributes to the whole interpretive experience. And I mean, one thing that I absolutely love about working with you, Teddie, aside from your fantastic musicianship and your poetry, is that we can argue in a healthy way about the interpretation, and we can experiment, and we try so many different things. And the week that you were here, we had all of this time to really explore this music that is so dear to us. And anybody who is a professional musician knows that having a week to spend together rehearsing is a luxury. It's a rarity.
Yes.
So often we're thrown together for gigs, and sometimes you don't know people and you have 3 hours to rehearse, and then you're on stage. And that's often our bread and butter. But the week that you were here, we went so deeply into the music, and for me to have time to first rehearse with you a bit and then look at the imagery and contemplate that definitely was incorporated into the process in a very meaningful way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I mean, obviously we've worked for so long together. I knew that even though I was doing most of the putting things together, but of course I knew that Yonit and I would be on the same page in terms of our musical interpretation and inclination. So I had no doubt that putting, that there was no question in putting all this stuff together, even though I was on my own doing it and then sharing with you just before the concert. And yeah, and maybe would you mind also sharing, because you also do programs which combine music with imagery. Would you mind telling the audience a bit about that? And so people can also get a sense of what are the possible different approaches in working with these kind of mediums, and maybe how have those projects been different from Discovering Light?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I would call myself an amateur photographer, and like you, I experience music visually a lot of the time, and when I'm playing music or when I'm listening to music, there's a lot of imagery that's going on in my brain, or a lot of gesture that's happening. Some people don't experience that. I thought everybody did, but apparently that's not the case. Some people experience temperature, or they experience color, or they experience emotion. It's different for everyone. But when I have put photography with my own concerts, it's been in the context of a project, an ongoing project called Chrome Attic, CROME, Attic, ATTIC, which is also a play on words for chromatic music, and an exploration of the idea of color and contrast in the sound world and in the visual world. And in music, and especially in Baroque music, especially in early Baroque music in the 17th century, you have so much contrast between many different things, not just louds and soft, but fast and slow, and different affects and different characters, and changing tempos, changing time signatures, changing gestures. And the imagery that I used for that particular concert series, if you want to call it that, those particular concerts, was to emphasize that idea of contrast between light and dark. And so I put that together. And then there was another project that I did last year called the Judith Project, which explored the biblical character of Judith. And that was a collaboration with my son's secondary school in Limerick. And so we incorporated into a performance made for film Baroque paintings of Judith. And so that one was a little more straightforward and fun. So it's always an interesting project deciding, is something added by adding a visual to the music? Does it add, does it take away, does it complement? And what images do you put up? Are they your own? Are they somebody else's? Are they new? Are they old? And then of course, how do you curate that into the program, whether it's on a screen or it's in real time? Is it fixed? Does it move with the music? All of these are, of course, important decisions in our curatorial role.
Yeah, so I think maybe the audience can get a sense of when we two come together, there's a never, we can talk till the next days. There's endless subjects to discuss, and just, yeah, endless connections to make. And so it's, I've really, this last time I've been really grateful, especially also after, 2 years of the pandemic and all that. That was really quite a lovely experience. I'm very thankful for that. And maybe just one last question. And whenever Yoni and I work together, there's always one experimental piece, and like we really don't know how it's going to work out. And this time it was actually Couperin's Le Fauvet Plaintive, which translates into the plaintive warbler. So warbler is a kind of bird. And this is also not the first time that we've turned a harpsichord solo piece into a piece for flute and harpsichord. And I just want to ask, how did it feel to approach the music in this other way? So not as a solo harpsichord piece, but as in something else.
Oh, it was fantastic. And it changes entirely my concept and everyone's listening experience of this piece, because you have a completely different instrument and a timbre. And so instead of having 3 equal voices playing something, now we have a flute and then the harpsichord playing the lower 2 voices. And so even though it wasn't continuo, in some ways it felt like a solo and an accompaniment, a top and a bottom rather than just 3 polyphonic voices. And so I listen in a completely different way. Suddenly the whole texture changes. And with good pieces of art, whether it's a book or a movie or a piece of music or literature or whatever it is, we return again and again and again throughout our lives. And every time we return to that, we hear, we see, we experience something totally different with it. And so playing around with instrumentation is one way to help facilitate a new entryway into experiencing that in a different way. And I think in particular for that piece of music, it really, really worked.
So maybe now the audience is a bit curious about how this actually sounded like. If we could get Vlad to play for us just a very brief segment of Couperin's Le Fauvette Plantive, that would be wonderful. Looking at the time now, we're going to open up the session to Q&A, and I think there are a couple of questions there in the chat. I'll just go ahead, and so feel free to either pop in your questions in the chat.
We have a few questions already, Teddie. If you'd like, I
Okay.
can forward
Okay, great.
those.
Yeah, maybe if you'll manage to listen, great.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. This is Vlad over at Hipster, and I'm lurking behind the little owl there on the Supermoon. I am just getting a question to you, Teddie, from Karen Loomis, who asks, do you experience similar emotions when you perform and when you do astrophotography?
Maybe, Karen, would you mind elaborating your question, just so that I can answer it better? Feel free to unmute yourself and jump in.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm trying to think how I can word it differently. When you're in the zone performing, do you experience a similar sense of in the zone when you're engrossed in your astrophotography?
Oh, yes, definitely. You can definitely feel if a session is going well and that you feel a flow in the images, and that, I don't check when I take photos, I don't check after every image because obviously that's very tiring. And but you get I check every now and then, but you do get a feeling of, okay, is this session going well, or is something is maybe not turning out the way that I want to, or maybe, I don't know, I can't get the right angle, or if I'm working with a person, maybe I'm not getting my subject to do what I'd like to be able to capture. And so definitely there is a sense of flow or no flow. And that's very similar to music. If something's going well, the breath is working well, the sound is flowing smoothly, as opposed to maybe sometimes, I don't know, for some reason, maybe if I'm sick for a while and then I haven't been playing for a while, then the air doesn't flow as nicely. And also, but also mentally, this kind of whether just things are traveling nicely or not. So definitely, yeah, in both of these disciplines, there is a sense of flow and emotion and being in the zone. Any other
No other questions have come in through the chat, but if anybody does have one right now, they can certainly unmute themselves and jump in. But in the meanwhile, I'll remind everyone that Maura has very graciously put the link for the concert itself, and it's there in the chat for you. It's on the galwayearlymusic.com site under events, Discovering Light. And one one question coming in just now from Howard Kosovske, and that is, as you're creating images, do you hear music?
Yes, I do. I don't have the image here, but one time, just as an example, it's not about astrophotography, but I was in Brittany, just on the coastline, and in Brittany they're very famous for their very jagged coastline, and there happens to be just one single fisherman on his lonely boat, and the boat kind of bobbed up and down on the water. So I was looking from a cliff above, and that the way how the boat was kind of bobbing up and down on the water, it totally reminded me of there's a piano piece by Maurice Ravel called Une barque sur l'océan, so a boat on the ocean. So certain images definitely remind me of not always specific pieces, but something, so things like that, so specific like that don't always happen, but definitely images do remind me of music. Any more questions? Or maybe people
I had a question. I had a question. Is it okay if I pop in with a question?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Certainly in the before the 20th century and before electric lighting, the night sky would have been so much more present and visible to people. And do you think that people in earlier centuries would have had a greater awareness and sense of connectedness to the night sky than we do today because of light pollution?
Oh yes, I definitely think so. And of course, yeah, well, it's hard to say. Obviously, we don't live in those times anymore, and they didn't also know anything else but the dark night sky. So I think that that having that darkness and to have that change between night and day and night definitely had an influence on their imagination. And I think we're in our modern society, we're so used to having light everywhere and we can see everything. And also in trends of photography, you'll notice that nowadays when you see an image or see a portrait, people are wanting to see all details. Like they want to be able to see every detail in everything. And that's, I like to make that analogy to music. Like, well, this is, it's like if you were to play every note the same and emphasize on every note, I think there's no room, and when you do that, there's no room for emotion and for interpretation anymore. And so definitely, I think having that night sky asset back then, when the nights were truly dark, had a significant impact compared to what we experience now. And that's kind of my wish as part of for this program, that through music, that the music and the night sky, this night sky connection, to be able to move people and bring awareness about the dark sky movement and light pollution. Because I think it's something that it's not really talked about, and we don't tend to notice it. Because obviously usually in the night when we go to sleep, and we're not really aware of what's happening, and we're so used to it already. Okay, well,
I'm just gonna jump in here just to say that Karen Loomis actually also gave a talk at the Galway Early Music Festival. She's an organologist and specializes in early Irish harp, and uses all sorts of modern scientific methods, non-invasive methods, for studying the old instruments that are in the museums.
I was gonna say, I was wondering, because your face looked really familiar, and I was like, where do I know her? And it turned out I was at that talk, and so Yeah, nice to meet you here. Maybe I'll just do a brief introduction about the supermoon that's happening tonight. So I don't know how is the weather situation in Ireland or where you are in the world. So at the moment it is kind of cloudy, but it has cleared up quite a bit. So I think there might be still a chance to see after all. So as soon as there's a break in the clouds, hopefully you'll be able to see something. Okay, so I'm obviously not an astronomer, but I'm happy to share what I've gathered. The supermoon is special because there are two astronomical events that are happening at the same time. Namely, the moon is in the full moon phase, and it is at a position in its orbit which is closest to our Earth. Now, this is due to the moon's elliptical orbit, so there's a point where it'll be closest to us, otherwise known as perigee, and also furthest away from us, which is apogee. If it's a full moon at or close to perigee, it's what we know as a supermoon. And if it's a full moon at apogee, it is actually known as a micromoon, which I had no idea, but I guess micromoons are probably less talked about than supermoons. And obviously, these names are not their official scientific terms, but they're definitely easier to remember than, for example, perigee syzygy, which would be the official astronomical name for the appearance tonight. And while mathematically speaking, it is true that the moon will appear bigger and brighter than the average full moon, the difference is that not actually something we'd really notice with our eyes. So here you see the difference between the normal full moon to the left compared to the supermoon on the right. You also most likely won't remember exactly how the last full moon looked like. So the difference is really only noticeable when comparing them side by side. Nevertheless, it's still a cool thing to celebrate. Moonrise is I think around 10:20 or so, depending on where you are in Ireland. Checked up Galway. Galway seems to have its moonrise at about 10:36. So if you can, try to find a place that's further away from city lights. So if you can get as a dark sky as possible, use binoculars if you have them. And if you do use binoculars, find a way to prop yourself against something, or maybe use tripods so that it's a bit more comfortable for the viewing. And if you plan on photographing the moon, keep in mind that the two main challenges are the overexposure of the moon's surface because it's so bright. And if you're using a long telephoto lens, you got to make sure you nail your focus. So I'd suggest that you focus on more on the edge of the moon as opposed to in the middle on the surface. So that's my little bit about the supermoon. And if there are no questions, thank you all once again. Happy moon watching, and I hope to see you all at another time.
Thank you very much to Teddie and Yonit. That was great fun, and I'm really looking forward to going out and seeing the supermoon now. And yeah, very thoughtful too. Just a lot to think about. It's just lovely to hear you talking about your thought processes as you put together a program like that. So just remind you once again that you can still watch the concert, and the link is in the chat. And basically it's on the galwayearlymusic.com website, part of the festival, one of the festival events. So you just go to the festival events. And lastly, thank you all for coming. It was lovely to see a fairly large number of people. That was lovely. And from all over the place. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.